Good evening. Welcome to Insights. Tonight's Insight show is a video production on Winter Soldier, an event happening in Washington, D.C. between March 13th and the 16th. Testimony from Iraq vets and other what's really happening in Iraq. This production video was courtesy of Democracy Now! And video production from the original, from IVAW's Iraq Veterans Against the War. Down in Washington, my guest tonight, who was there for the entire event, is Nate Goldschlag. Nate is coordinator of the Smedley Butler Brigade, Boston, Mass. Nate, welcome to Insights.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Nate. Nate, first question, why'd you go and what did you bring back?
Well, I went because this is a historic event. In 1971, there was another Winter Soldier hearing held by Vietnam veterans about atrocities they had witnessed. This time, these courageous young men and women and Iraq veterans against the war came together to testify as to what really is going on in Iraq, how the population is being brutalized. They talked about the murders that they themselves have committed, and it was extremely moving and an important event. That's why I went. What I brought back was a further understanding of exactly what they've been through, because you really have to hear it from those veterans in order to understand what's going on. We're not getting a picture in the media of what's really happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. And these young men and women courageously told their own stories and are very sorry, many of them, for what they've done. But these stories are not being heard in the United States, and they have to be heard.
Yes, as in Winter Soldier 1, there was, and by editing, I just kept going over and seeing the same sort of responses like from Winter Soldier 1, which was back from Vietnam, guys that we both know that are now members of VFP, and the images that are left in their minds permanently. You know, did you get that there was that impact that they have for the rest of their lives?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, many of them talked about their own mental health. How you'll see in these productions, one veteran tried to kill himself after he came back. So these are events that have scarred them, that will affect them for the rest of their lives. They talked a lot about that. They talked about not only the effects on the Iraqis and then the estimated 1 million Iraqis that have died, almost also civilians, but they also talked about the effects on themselves and the effects on their own mental health and their post-traumatic stress that many of them have. So many of them, you know, are testifying about these things really in public for the first time.
Yes, I think that's the most impressive attribute to this, is that you don't see this on corporate media. You don't see this, what the soldiers say. You hear what some general that's in the distance or some politician is saying, but this is the actual guys on the ground, day-to-day operations that they're bringing back to us, you know, their personal insights of what's happening in Iraq.
Right. It's their own stories. It's what they've, not only did they talk about it, they had video. They had photographs. These GIs these days are carrying around little digital cameras and are documenting what happened there, or they're documenting what happened. They showed that.
Yes, and stay tuned now for the first production of Winter Soldier. There'll be one second coming up, and Nate will be back with us. And so thanks for watching Insights, and hope this gives you more insights into what's happening in Iraq. Thank you, good night, and good luck.
My name is John Michael Turner. I currently reside in Burlington, Vermont. I served with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines as an automatic machine gunner. There's a term, once a Marine, always a Marine, but there's also the term, eat the apple, F the Corps. I don't work for you no more.
I guess I'm just sick of being lied to. I'm sick of America being lied to.
I joined the military in 1995 as an infantryman. And I deployed to the Middle East in March of '03, first to Jordan and then to Iraq in April of that same year. The first mission that we had when we got to Iraq was at this place called Al-Assad, and our job there was basically to run a prisoner of war camp. And at this prisoner of war camp, our job was basically to keep prisoners who have been deemed enemy combatants sleep deprived for periods of up to 72 hours in order to, quote unquote, soften them up for interrogation. And the way we did that was by yelling at them. So my first question to the people who were training us on how to do this was, how do they understand? I mean, they don't speak English. And he said, well, they're just like animals, they're just like dogs. If you keep yelling at them, it doesn't matter what language you're yelling at them in, they're going to get the point. If you yell at them, get up enough times, just like a dog gets up, they'll get up. If you tell them to move left, eventually they'll get it and they'll move left. And they said, but that's not going to always work because they're so tired. By the way, they were hooded with sandbags and they were tied with plastic restraints, barefoot, and circled around with concertina wire. So they were not only being deprived of sleep, but also of light and a sense of space. And so the next thing that we did was to hit the wall next to them with a sledgehammer to create this explosion-like sound to scare them. And when that didn't work, the next step was to put a gun to their heads and to charge it as if to execute them. Basically, we were performing mock executions to scare this man. And every now and then that wouldn't work, so you would grab the person who was not obeying and put him in a chamber and hit the wall next to this person to basically drive him insane and get them to obey. Another time, I remember we were at a traffic control point and we had received reports of ambulances being used to deliver explosives. So we were really close to the only, we were actually blocking the only road that led to the hospital, to the local hospital, and this ambulance came upon our traffic control point, and they told us that we could not let the ambulance through. There was a pregnant woman who needed to get to the hospital, but they said, we don't know if that's a pregnant woman or if this is, a van, full of explosives and it's going to explode. So we basically turned it back. And I remember at the time I felt bad, and I wanted to send a team to basically to search the van and to establish whether there really was a pregnant woman. But I kept thinking of the images of the ambulance exploding in the perimeter and killing a bunch of our people. So I basically made the decision not to search the van and to just turn it away. Another time, we were again at a traffic control point, and we were attacked, and we were in the middle of a firefight, and then they stopped shooting at us, and we began to assess the damage and to collect our wounded, and there were a lot of Iraqi civilians who were killed. And from this car came a voice that was calling me, Mr., Mr., and I approached the car, and again, we had this intel report saying that at traffic control points, people will call you and say, help me, and then they'll shoot you or the vehicle will blow up. So when I'm approaching this car, and right after this firefight, and then after this happened, then they began shooting at us again. But as I approached this car, I saw that there was this young man at the driver's seat, and that there were two older gentlemen who were also wounded, one pretty badly, and who were saying, help me. And at the time, all I could think about was that intel report saying, these people are trying to kill you. So I basically had my rifle aimed at them, and I was about to shoot him until somebody came and said, Sergeant, they're wounded, don't shoot at them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's almost impossible to act upon your morality in a situation like that when you have been fed all this information that these people are out there to kill you, and what you do is you basically remove the humanity from them to make it easier to oppress them, to brutalize them, to beat them, and in doing so you remove the humanity from yourself because you cannot act as a human being and do all of these things. And One last incident that I want to talk about was the first time that I opened fire on a human being, and this happened right after a protest. They were throwing grenades at us, and they said, you know, if anybody throws a grenade, you know, you open fire on them. So we saw this coming, and I saw this young man, basically, you know, his arm was swinging, and he had a black object in his hand, which was indeed a grenade. And I remember seeing all of this through the rear aperture of my M16 rifle sight. And I remember when we opened fire on him. And then I remember when two men came from the crowd and basically dragged them by his shoulders back into the crowd after we killed them. And after that incident, I remember going into a room by myself and counting the rounds that I had left in my magazine, and I had 19 rounds left, which meant that I had fired 11 rounds at this person, and but yet I had no recollection of hitting him or him going down, him dropping, him dying. There's this blank space in my memory, which is a blank space that I have for other experiences, like this time when this child was basically riding in the passenger seat with his father, and we decapitated his father with a machine gun. And when we went down to the low ground to search for enemy wounded, I remember seeing this young person standing next to this body that was decapitated. And when I think about it, I cannot remember the expression on the child's face. I cannot remember that it was a child. I only know this because people told me later on that was the man's son, the man's young son, who was standing next to the body. And it's because not only it's not enough to dehumanize the enemy by means of your military background or training or the indoctrination or the heat and the fatigue and the intensity of the environment. But there are times when it is so hard to deal with these experiences that I suppose your own body, your own psyche, in order to protect you from these memories and in order to protect you from losing your humanity, erases certain memories that are too painful to deal with, that are too overwhelming to deal with. And whether it is to punish the men in your squad or the men in your unit, or to erase the face of a child whose father was decapitated next to him in a car at a traffic control point, or whether it is to pose next to a dead civilian or Iraqi or whoever, it is necessary to become dehumanized, because war is dehumanizing. And we have a whole new generation. We have over 1 million Iraqi dead. We have over 5 million Iraqis displaced. We have close to 4,000 dead. We have close to 60,000 injured, both by combat injuries and non-combat injuries coming back from this war. And that's not even counting the post-traumatic stress disorder and all the other psychological and emotional scars that our generation is bringing home with them. So all that just to say that war is dehumanizing a whole new generation of this country and destroying the people in the country of Iraq. In order for us to reclaim our humanity as a military and as a country, we demand the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all troops from Iraq, care and benefits for all veterans.
On April 18th, 2006, I had my first confirmed kill. This man was innocent. I don't know his name. I called him the Fat Man. He was walking back to his house, and I shot him in front of his friend and his father. The first round didn't kill him after I had hit him up here in his neck area. And afterwards, he started screaming and looked right into my eyes. So I looked at my friend who I was on post with, and I said, well, I can't let that happen. So I took another shot and took him out. He was then carried away by the rest of his family. It took 7 people to carry his body away. We were all congratulated after we had our first kills, and that happened to have been mine. My company commander personally congratulated me, as he did everyone else in our company. This is the same individual who had stated that whoever gets their first kill by stabbing them to death will get a 4-day pass when we return from Iraq. There was one incident where we got into a firefight just south of the government center, about 2,000 meters. We had no idea where the fire was coming from, and the way our rules of engagement were, pinpoint where the fire is coming from and throw a rocket at it. So with that being said, we still didn't know where the fire was coming from, and an 84-millimeter rocket was shot into a house. I do not know if there was anyone in it. We do not know if that's where the fire was coming from, but that's what was done. Please go to the next image. This man right here was my third confirmed kill. As you can see, he was riding his bicycle. Later on in the day, we went ahead and we had CBS Laura Logan with us, but she was with the other squad. And so she wasn't with us. So myself and two other people went ahead and took out some individuals because we were excited about the firefight we had just gotten into, and we didn't have a cameraman or woman with us. With that being said, anytime we did have embedded reporters with us, our actions would change drastically. We never acted the same. We were always on key with everything, did everything by the books. The man on the bicycle, he was left in the street for about 10 minutes until we realized that we needed to leave where we were. And his body was dragged about 10 feet to the right of him, where his body was thrown behind a rock wall, and his bicycle was thrown on top of him. Another thing that we used to do a lot was recon by fire, where we would go ahead and try to start a firefight if we felt threatened in any way, shape, or form. There's one particular incident where we were working with the Iraqi Army and the Iraqi Special Forces in downtown Ramadi, and with our squad and the Iraqi Army, there was also lieutenant colonels, majors, first sergeants, and sergeant majors. Sorry, sergeants major. With that being said, the Iraqi Army would go into the house, kick in the doors, and then go ahead and shoot. And there were loud bursts of machine gun fire. We thought we were taking fire, but then we later found out that it was them. House raids. Because we were a grunt battalion, we were responsible for going on several patrols. A lot of the raids and patrols we did were at the night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, around there. And what we would do is just kick in the doors and terrorize the families. That was an image taken around 3 o'clock in the morning through night vision goggles. And that is the segregation of the women and children and the men. If the men of the household were giving us problems, we'd go ahead and take care of them any way we felt necessary, whether it be choking them or slamming their head against the walls. If you go back to that one picture, that was one man that wasn't taken, that was taken care of in a very bad way. Because of all the wiring that he had, it would be considered an IED making material. On my wrist, there's Arabic for FU. I got that put on my wrist just 2 weeks before we went to Iraq because that was my choking hand. And anytime I felt the need to take out aggression, I would go ahead and use it. Please go to the next picture. Next. There's an instance of detainees and how they were treated in a nice manner. Next. That is the Fatimat Mosque minaret. As you can see, it is written with bullet holes and holes in the top of it. Those were from mortars. And the next video that I'm going to show you is a tank round that went into that minaret, where we weren't sure if we were taking fire or not. I'll talk about this one. This is after one of the guys in weapons company had gotten shot. This is a way that we would take out our aggression. For those of you who don't know, it is illegal to shoot into a mosque unless you were taking fire from it. There was no fire that was taken from that mosque. It was shot into because we were angry. Can you please play the next video?
We are on ice cream, trying to suppress the blue and white minaret named Farimat al-Zahra.
Hellraiser, Hellraiser. Go ahead and take another tank round at that building over, at that mosque over. Another round.
Kilo 2. Oh! Yes!
Next image. That, okay. With that being said, there's many more stories and incidents for me to talk about, although we don't have the time to. But this just goes to show you that that was the after effect of the tank round. This just goes to show you that everyone sitting up here has these stories. And there's been over 1 million troops that have gone in and out of Iraq. So the possibilities are endless. Next image, please. The reason I am doing this today is not only for myself and for the rest of society to hear, but it's for all those who can't be here to talk about the things that we went through, talk about the things that we did. Next image. Those 4 crosses and this memorial service were for the 5 guys in Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines that we lost. Throughout our unit, we had 18 that got killed. With that being said, that is my testimony. I just want to say that I am sorry for the hate and destruction that I've inflicted on innocent people. And I'm sorry for the hate and destruction that others have inflicted on innocent people. At one point, it was okay, but reality has shown that is not, and that this is happening, and that until people hear about what is going on with this war, it will continue to happen and people will continue to die. I am sorry for the things that I did. I am no longer the monster that I once was. Thank you.
Former Marine John Michael Turner.
With the rank of sergeant. During my time in the Marine Corps, I served 3 deployments to Iraq, including the invasion. And in case any inquiring minds want to know, I served 4 years and 10 months because I voluntarily extended my enlistment contract by 10 months to redeploy with my unit for the 3rd tour. My first tour started in January 2003 and ended in September of that year. My second tour was from February to September of 2004, and my last tour was from September 2005 to March 30th, 2006. Proper rules of engagement serve an important strategic purpose, which is to legitimize military force. By projecting an image of restraint and professionalism, militaries seek to reinforce the idea that they're protecting local residents rather than oppressing them. Not only do these rules undermine support for any local opposition, they also deflect accusations of occupation and oppression from foreign countries and in some cases the people of the country the military is supposedly serving. Martin van Creveld, who was an Israeli military historian, even asserted some years ago that the British had not yet been driven from Northern Ireland because they were taking more casualties than the Irish were. The US, on the other hand, has not chosen to use rules of engagement in the same way in Iraq. The rules of engagement have been broadly defined and loosely enforced to protect US service members at the expense of the Iraqi people, and anyone who tells you different is either a liar or a fool. During the invasion of Iraq, during the push north to Baghdad, the rules of engagement given to me were gradually reduced to the point of non-existence, similar to the cases that you've already heard. When we first crossed the Kuwait-Iraq border at Azubair in March 2003, we were operating under Geneva Convention guidelines and were authorized to shoot anyone wearing a military uniform, except for medical and religious personnel, unless they had surrendered. By the time we got to Baghdad, however, I was explicitly told by my chain of command that I could shoot anyone who came closer to me than I felt comfortable with if that person did not immediately move when I ordered them to do so, keeping in mind I don't speak Arabic. The general attitude that I got from my chain of command was better them than us, and the guidance that we were given reinforced that attitude across the ranks. It was an attitude that I watched intensify greatly throughout the course of my 3 tours. I remember in January of 2004 attending the formation where we were given what was going to be our mission for the second deployment. And I was sitting there like a good Marine with my pen and paper, ready to write down those carefully chosen, thoughtful words that would justify my existence in Iraq for the next 7 months. And my commander told me that our mission was, and I quote, "to kill those who need to be killed and save those who need to be saved." And that was it. And with those words, he pretty much set the tone for the deployment. At the start of that second deployment, our standing rules of engagement were that someone had to be displaying hostile intent and committing a hostile act before deadly force could be used. I won't get into the absurdity of asking one to discern what is going on in the mind of another individual, except to say that it was the individual Marine's job to determine what is hostile intent and a hostile action. However, during the April offensive of 2004, in which attacks erupted all over Anbar province, my unit was involved in a 2-day firefight. Shortly after the firefight was underway, the same commander who had given us the mission issued an order that everyone wearing a black dishdasha and a red headscarf was automatically displaying hostile intent and a hostile action and was to be shot. An hour or 2 later, he gave another order, this time that everyone on the streets was considered an enemy combatant. I can remember one instance after the order was given that afternoon when we came around a corner and an unarmed Iraqi man stepped out of a doorway. I remember the Marine directly in front of me raising his rifle and aiming at the unarmed man, and then I think just for some psychological reason my brain blocked out the actual shots, because the next thing I remember is stepping over the dead man's body to clear the room that he came out of. I remember that it was a storage room, and it was full of some Arabic brand of Iraq, or some Arabic brand of cheesy poofs, like Cheetos. There weren't any weapons in the area except for ours. The commander told us a couple of weeks later that over 100 enemy, quote unquote, had been killed. And to the best of my knowledge, that number includes all of the people who were shot for simply walking down the street in their own city. After the firefight was over, the standing rules of engagement for my unit were changed so that Marines didn't need to identify a hostile action anymore in order to use deadly force. They just had to identify hostile intent. The rules also explicitly stated that carrying a shovel, standing on a rooftop while speaking on a cell phone or holding binoculars, or being out after curfew were automatically considered hostile intent, and we were authorized to use deadly force. And I can only guess how many innocent people died during my tour because of those orders. On my third tour, the rules of engagement were stricter, but they really only existed so that the command could say there were rules of engagement that were being followed. In reality, my officers explicitly told me and my fellow Marines that if we felt threatened by an Iraqi's presence, we should just shoot them, and the officers would, quote unquote, take care of us. By this time, many of the Marines who were on their second or third tour had suffered such serious psychological trauma, having watched friends die and lose limbs, that because of these experiences, they were moved to shoot people who, in my opinion, were clearly non-combatants. There was one incident when a roadside bomb exploded, and a few minutes later, I watched a Marine start shooting at cars that were driving down the street hundreds of meters away and in the opposite direction from where the IED had exploded. We were too far away to identify who was in the cars, and they didn't pose any threat to us. And for all I could tell, as I was standing about 20 meters away from the Marine and about 300 meters from the cars, they were just passing motorists. It was long enough after and far enough away from the explosion that the people in the cars might not have even known that anything was going on or that anything had even happened, but the Marine was shooting at them anyway. This Marine had had his best friend get killed on our last deployment, and had also related to me a story about the 2-day firefight that I mentioned earlier, when he watched the commander, who had given us the order to shoot anyone on the street, shoot 2 old ladies that were walking and carrying vegetables. He said that the commander had told him to shoot the woman, and when he refused because they were carrying vegetables, the commander shot them. So when this Marine started shooting at people in cars that nobody else felt were threatening, he was only following the example that his commander had already set. I don't have anywhere near enough time to tell you every related experience that I had in Iraq. But in general, the rules of engagement changed frequently, contradicted themselves, and when they were restrictive, they were either loosely enforced or escalations of force, as shootings of civilians were known, were not reported because Marines did not want to send their brothers in arms to prison when all they were trying to do was protect themselves in a situation they'd been forced into, where there was a constant, ambiguous, and deadly threat, and any citizen of the country that they were supposedly liberating could have been wearing an explosive vest. With no way to identify their attackers and no clear mission worth dying for, Marines viewed the rules of engagement as either a joke or a technicality to be worked around so that they could bring each other home alive. Not only are the misuse of rules of engagement in Iraq indicative of supreme strategic incompetence, they are also a moral disgrace. The people who have set them should be ashamed of ourselves, and they're just one of the many reasons why the troops should be withdrawn immediately from Iraq.
I had joined the Army right after September 11th and asked for airborne, asked for infantry, ended up with 82nd Airborne Division, 1st 325 HHC, Battalion Mortars, Hunters in the Sky, Death from Above, and went in November 2001 and left the Army in December 2004. I was deployed to Kuwait in February 2003 and subsequently was part of the invasion in March. Originally, we were going to jump inside Baghdad Airport, but Third ID was ahead of schedule, so we drove in and secured this town that was hitting the supply line. It's a town called Osamawa. This was my first experience with the job that I was trained to do. You know, I was a mortarman, 81 millimeter mortar. We were set up outside the town of Osamawa in basically a dump. Flies were so heavy you couldn't eat. When the sun was up, you'd eat a mouthful of flies with your MRE pudding. But what I saw there, you know, more so even what I participated in, you know, hearing the radio calls over for the line companies that are in trouble, or they spot some people go into a building. So we get that fire mission and we destroy the building with our mortars. I set the timers, I set the rounds, the charges for the mortars. I was part of that team that sent those rounds downrange. And you know, this isn't army to army. You know, people live in towns. It's beyond imagination to think that normal people, civilians, don't live in towns. This is upside down thinking. So I never really saw the effects of my mortar rounds in the towns. So that just leaves my imagination open to countless deaths that I don't know how many civilians, innocents I've killed, helped kill. The another big piece of weaponry that they used on this little town of Osamawa was called a Spectre gunship. It's a C-130 with belt-fed howitzer cannons, 2 of those, and some like super Gatling guns. I wouldn't know the proper nomenclature for that. And they would sweep around Osamawa, just pounding the city. And this is definitely a sight to be seen, this airplane. I mean, it's almost, even though the rounds are coming from up in the sky, it's almost like the ground is shaking. And again, over the city, over neighborhoods, Kiowa attack helicopters with their Hellfire missiles. You know, F-18s dropping bombs that would shake you to the bone. All the while I was laying down mortar fire on this town full of people. And the radio was always never a good thing came over the radio. One time they said that to fire on all taxi cabs because the enemy was using them for transportation. And in Iraq, any car can be a taxi cab. You just paint it white and orange, and there you have it. And one of the snipers across the radio replied back, excuse me, did I hear that right? Fire on all taxi cabs? And the Lieutenant Colonel replied back, like, you heard me, trooper, fire on all taxi cabs. And once that conversation ended, the town pretty much lit up. All the units that were in there fired on numerous cars. Again, you know, people, where's the real proof? This was my first experience with war. That really kind of set the tone for the rest of the deployment. Then I went to Fallujah for a couple of weeks, and our Charlie company picked a fight there, and so we had to skip out. My Fallujah story is not like other Fallujah stories. I was out in this resort area that got stripped up, that we took over, and had my weapon 30 meters away from me working on my Tana in a man-made lake. But hearing the stories come back from inside town. And then we went to Baghdad and pretty much ran that town into the ground. You know, there was no real structure there, no police, no authority except for us. And we took full advantage of that in the treatment of the people. And just overall viewpoints. I mean, myself, I never really considered myself a racist person, but everything was Haji this, Haji that, Haji smokes, Haji burger, Haji house, Haji clothes, Haji rag. Haji's the same as honky. It's the same thing, but I had to catch myself. And then with raids, we never went on a raid where we got the right house, much less the right person. Not once. We were outside of Baghdad, this water treatment plant. And it seemed like a pretty nice area, you know, trees, green. But then, as we were leaving, two men with RPGs run out in front of us in the road. And there's a lot of yelling and screaming. And they holded themselves with women and children that were there, and we're all screaming, drop your weapon, drop your weapons. They had RPGs slung on their backs. And I was watching my sector on the left. They were on the right. You know, I was very adamant about watching my sector over there. But I just couldn't take it anymore, and I swung my rifle around, had my sight on the dude in the doorway, RPG on his back, had my sight on his chest. This is what I'm trained to do. But when I looked at his face, he wasn't a boogeyman. He wasn't the enemy. He was scared and confused. Probably the same expression I had on my face during the same time. He was probably fed the same BS I was fed to put myself in that situation. But seeing his face, took me back, and I didn't pull the trigger. He got away. We get back up with Apache helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles, and we go back into this nice little village asking questions. And you know, it's a pretty good history in Iraq. You know, if you got beef with your neighbor back in Saddam's day, you just say, "Hey, police, they said something bad about Saddam. Why don't you go get them?" And they take them and they torture them. Well, now here with the U.S., we're asking who are the troublemakers, and we hear from the people in the village that these people are troublemakers over here. So we go, and myself and another soldier steps off, and we toss the hut. Well, the only thing I find is a little .22 pistol, not AK-47s, not RPGs, not pictures of Saddam, not large caches of money. But we end up taking the two young men regardless. And I looked at my sergeant and I was like, "Sergeant, these aren't the men that we're looking for." And he told me, "Don't worry. I'm sure they would have done something anyways." And this mother, all the while, is crying in my face, trying to kiss my feet. And, you know, I can't speak Arabic. I can speak human. She was saying, "Please, why are you taking my sons? They have done nothing wrong." And that made me feel very powerless. You know, I was 82nd Airborne Division Infantry with Apache helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles, and my armor, my M4. I was powerless. I was powerless to help her. And I was very naive back then. I thought that, you know, they would just take them and find out, yeah, they don't know anything. But later I found out people who were detained are being detained for years. Parents don't even know where their children are. And the lack of humanity in war, the place where you put yourself is, when you look at it in back, it's almost alien. We were driving down Baghdad one day, and we found a dead body on the side of the road. So we all pulled over to secure it and wait for MPs or whatever authorities would come and take care of this dead man here who was clearly murdered. And my friends jumped off and started taking pictures with him, you know, with big old smiles on their faces, you know. And they said, "Hey, Vijus, you know, you want your picture with this guy?" And I said, "No." But no, not in the context of that's really messed up because it's just wrong on an ethical basis. But I said no because it wasn't my kill. You shouldn't take trophies for things you didn't kill. I mean, that's what my mindset was back then. Because I wasn't even upset that this man was really dead. They shouldn't have been taking credit for something they didn't do.
All the enemy combatants were, in fact, killed. You know, we rolled through there, and I didn't see anything that I could identify as an enemy combatant. You know, dead women and children, men, all over the place, in the streets, homes completely destroyed.
My name is Jason Washburn. I was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, in which I served 4 years. I did 3 tours in Iraq. My first 2 tours were with the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, Charlie Company. And my 3rd tour was with 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines Weapon Company. I was in the initial invasion, and eventually after the invasion was done, we settled down in Al-Hila. This was in '03. From '04 to '05, I was in Najaf, and from '05 to '06, I was in Haditha. During the course of my 3 tours, the rules of engagement changed a lot. It seemed like every time we turned around, we had different rules of engagement, and they told us the reasons they were changing them was because it depended on the climate of the area at the time, what the threat level was deemed to be, and the higher the threat level was, the more viciously we were permitted and expected to respond. And for example, during the invasion, we were told to use target identification before engaging with anyone, but if the town or the city that we were approaching was a known threat, if the unit that went through the area before we did took a high number of casualties, we were basically, we were allowed to shoot whatever we wanted. It was deemed to be a free fire zone. So we would roll through the town, and anything that we saw, everything that we saw, we engaged it and opened fire on everything. And let's see. And there was really, I mean, there was really no rule governing the amount of force we were allowed to use on targets during the invasion. I remember one woman was walking by, and she was carrying a huge bag, and she looked like she was heading towards us. So we lit her up with the Mark 19, which is an automatic grenade launcher. And when the dust settled, we realized that the bag was only full of groceries. And I mean, she had been trying to bring us food, and we blew her to pieces for it. After the invasion ended and Bush declared mission accomplished, the rules changed pretty drastically. Instead of actually firing, we used a lot of, I guess, close combat, just hand-to-hand type stuff, just simple hand-to-hand violence to subdue people. There were a lot of times where we would be out on foot patrols, and you know, we were ordered to not allow people to pass through our patrol formation. And unsuspecting villagers would try to pass through or cut through the formation, and we would butt stroke them, jab them with the muzzle, you know, kick them or whatever, you know, just get them out of the formation. And one time there was a guy on a bicycle with a basket full of groceries, and he tried to you know, just roll through, and you know, we clotheslined him and smashed up his bicycle for what? You know, passing through the formation. And but this is like what we were expected to do. And in another instance, we were ordered to guard a fuel station. At the end of the day, like nothing had happened, and we had mounted up into our trucks. And right when we were about to take off, a bunch of people, Iraqi people, rushed to the fuel pumps to try to take some fuel. And our squad leader called it in, and the response was over the radio was, "What do you think we want you to do? You know, go F them up." Obviously, in more colorful, you know, language, but so we jumped off the trucks and charged at the Iraqis, and we really beat the hell out of them, and with rifles, fists, feet, everything else that we had available. You know, so once they had either fled or were broken and bleeding, you know, unconscious on the ground, we mounted back up in our trucks and left. We were never told to detain anyone there or, you know, question anyone. It just messed them up, you know. And most of the innocents that I actually saw get killed were behind the wheel of a vehicle, usually a taxi driver. I've been present for almost a dozen of those types of people that got killed just driving. During my third deployment, there was a rule in place where all Iraqi traffic had to pull off of the road to let military convoys pass by. If they didn't comply, or somebody got back on the road too early, they would get shot up. If they approached a checkpoint too fast or too recklessly, they would get shot up. Also, we were often told to be on the lookout for vehicle-borne IEDs, improvised explosive devices, matching the description of every taxi in Iraq. You know, be on the lookout for a car that has orange panel doors and, you know, front that's white, or vice versa. And it's like every taxi in Iraq, that's exactly what it looks like. And those are the cars that we're supposed to be looking out for that could be, VBIEDs. And so quite a few of those guys got shot up just because their car looked like what we were told to look out for. In another instance, it was actually a mayor of a town in our AO near Haditha that got shot. Our command showed us pictures from the incident. They had gathered the whole company together, and they were showing pictures of all of this, what everything looked like, and pointed out the reason that they did this was because there was a really nice, tight shot group in the windshield, and he announced to the company that this is what good Marine shooting looks like. And that was the mayor of the town. And it was actually my squad that was after that tasked with going to apologize to the family and pay reparations. But it was kind of like, basically all we did was go there and, give them some money and then leave. And, oh well, is, the way, it seemed they wanted us to apologize to them. It was really a joke. Something else we were actually encouraged to do, almost with a wink and a nudge, was to carry drop weapons, or by my third tour, drop shovels. What that basically is we would carry these weapons or shovels with us because in case we accidentally did shoot a civilian, we could just toss the weapon on the body and make them look like they were an insurgent.
I was a sergeant. I was deployed to Iraq with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Division, or 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, from April 2003 to 2004. I am a combat veteran. I was stationed in the Al Anbar presence on the western edge on the Syrian border. We occupied a local train station there in an area called Al-Qaim, and which we called Tiger Base. While at Tiger Base, I was put in charge of the detainee site, which consisted merely of one of those shipping containers that we're all familiar with, or at least most of us. And the shipping container and just a single building surrounded by barbed wire. I had 2 soldiers to back me up when I was handling the detainees, and I was briefed by the sergeant that I relieved that the men in the shipping container were captured combatants, and I was to deprive them of sleep. So I had them standing inside the shipping container, facing the walls, no talking. I let them have blankets because it was cold, but they were not allowed to sit down or lay down. Anytime they started falling out or dozing off, they put their heads on the wall. I would be on the outside of the shipping container, and I'd just smack the shipping container with a pickaxe handle, try to wake them up and keep them awake. The men in the building were non-combatant detainees just being held for questioning. There were 93 men altogether. Using one of them to translate, I told them that they had a clean slate with me. If they didn't give me any trouble, then the next 24 hours would pass calmly. If they did, I told them it was going to be a long 24 hours. And I just prayed that they didn't give me any trouble, because I didn't know what I would have had to do. They even told me I was a good man while I was in charge of them. One day, a body bag was dropped off to me. When the soldiers came to retrieve it the next morning, they just threw it on top of some junk in the back of a truck. But the rigor mortis had already set in, and it wouldn't fit down inside the truck on top of the stuff. So the soldiers started stomping on it. I mean, like, really stomping on it. I couldn't imagine. I was like, how can you do that? I also had a former Iraqi general, some of you may have heard of, who was taken from my custody I was told to keep him separated from the other non-combatants and give him everything he needs. If he asks for anything, hook him up, take care of him, and don't harass him. And I was like, well, I don't need somebody to tell me to not harass somebody. He ended up, a soldier came up to me later and ended up telling me that, hey, he died during questioning, during his interrogation. And I'm thinking to myself, how tough does a question have to be to kill? I don't know exactly what went on during his interrogation, but he was fine when I had him. Days after he was taken from my custody, I had in my custody his 14-year-old son, a very bright child, spoke 4 languages. He was supposed to be taken to his father. I was told that, loosen his tongue up, get him to talk a little more, just try to get him to cooperate more. And instead, that boy was being taken to identify his father's body. Now, I'm not sure, but it's possible that if that child was pro-American or just one of our friends, an ally, possible ally of us, I'm pretty sure he wasn't an ally of ours anymore. Sometime later, the detainee site was taken over and rebuilt by men that we were told to call OGAs, which stood for Other Governmental Agency. However, that's a pretty vague term. They built high walls around the detainee center, and I figured, well, yeah, the terrorists, you don't want them seeing out. You don't want them, you want to contain them, deny them like any kind of possible information that they could use to possibly escape. And then later on, I realized that it wasn't just so detainees couldn't see out, it was so we couldn't see in. One night I was told to give a message down to the detainee site. I knocked on the door, and when they opened it, I witnessed one detainee being kicked around on the ground in the mud, rolled over again and again. Just the agent was just kicking him with his foot, just rolling him over in the mud, pouring water on his face. The whole waterboarding thing. And another detainee was standing there with a bag over his head and was forced to carry a huge rock until he just physically couldn't do it anymore and just collapsed. That image seared itself into my mind's eye, and I can't forget it. I won't forget it. Sorry. As I wrap this up, I just want to say 2 things. The longer we live as a human race, we're supposed to be getting smarter and wiser and better. And to the vets that we're trying to bring home alive, decades from now, when you got your grandchild sitting on your knee bouncing in front of you, just try to remember what we did here today under the flag, IVAW. Thank you.
And the river opens for the righteous, 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 and the river opens for the righteous. Someday I was walking with my brother, and he wondered what's on my mind.